What happens when devotion to God gets all tangled up with devotion to country? I mean, is it really possible to love your nation without somehow making it an idol?
That is the central tension.
Hmm.
It's a question that's really reshaping a lot of the American political landscape right now.
It's a huge dilemma, and it sits at the heart of, well, one of the most intellectually demanding conversations in American public life.
It really is. And
Hmm.
it forces you to question the fundamental role of religion in the public square.
Before we really dive in, I want to mention we're trying something a little different today.
It's right.
Discover a new, in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary.
So unlike our previous review, which was a more focused kind of surgical analysis, this feature delivers a really comprehensive overview.
We're tracing the intellectual roots, the key arguments, and the real-world impact of this subject.
And if you appreciate this expanded format, and if you find it helpful, please let us know.
Your feedback will absolutely help shape what we do in the future.
Our focus today is the book The Religion of American Greatness: What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism. It's by Paul D. Miller.
It came out in 2022, and it's just essential reading on this topic. Miller's perspective is what makes it so interesting.
Right. He's a conservative, he's an evangelical Christian, and he's a political theorist who has actually served in government.
And that background really sets his mission. He argues that Christian nationalism is an illiberal political theory.
And that it's dangerous, that it damages both the church's witness and the constitutional order. So it's very much an internal critique.
He's challenging what he sees as a dangerous trend from within his own community.
Exactly. And the book is laid out very logically. He guides you through it in three main stages.
Okay, we wrote it.
First, he defines and diagnoses the issue. What is Christian nationalism, and just as important, what isn't it? Then he moves into a deep theological and historical critique.
Asking if America really has some kind of divine mandate.
Precisely. And finally, he offers constructive proposals, a different way forward for Christians who want to engage in political life.
And a quick note on how we're putting all this together. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
We fed the source material into the tool, and it helped us instantly map the book's core arguments and connect them to broader historical and theological themes. It just lets us connect the dots much faster.
Okay, let's start with that groundwork Miller lays, because the definitions are so important here.
They are everything.
His main claim is that Christian nationalism, which he calls the religion of American greatness, is a mistaken political theory.
Mistaken and dangerous. And the danger comes from how it sacralizes a very specific, often nostalgic image of the nation.
It makes a nation holy.
In a way, yes. And to get that, you have to understand his very sharp distinction between patriotism and nationalism.
Okay, let's break that down. What's patriotism in his view?
Patriotism is framed as a healthy civic loyalty. It's a feeling of gratitude. Gratitude for a country's founding ideals and its institutions. It's an affirmation of the American creed.
So it's a loyalty to what the nation aspires to be.
Exactly, even when it falls short. But nationalism, that's a different beast entirely.
How so?
Nationalism, as Miller defines it, is a political theory. It's about using the power of the state to protect and to privilege a culturally defined people.
And in this context, that people is a specific Anglo Protestant cultural identity.
Yes. The belief is that the nation's identity is tied to that specific history, and that history must be institutionally preserved.
Which brings us right to the book's main target, Christian nationalism. How does he define that specifically?
He says it asserts two main things. First, that America is a distinctive nation defined by Christianity and Christian cultural norms.
And second,
And this is the crucial part, that the government and its citizens have a duty to actively preserve that specific Christian character.
so using state power to protect a certain cultural dominance.
That's the key. And this isn't some abstract theory form. He grounds this whole debate in recent American political history.
Right, he talks about the rise of the Christian right in the late 20th century.
He does. He shows how a desire for political influence, which is a normal part of democracy, morphed over time in some groups into a demand for cultural and legal privilege, a demand for control.
Let's get to the theological core of his critique now. As an evangelical himself, Miller argues that Christian nationalism makes a fatal biblical error.
Huge one.
He rejects this idea of America as a new Israel. What's the theological problem with that comparison?
The problem is idolatry. It's turning your national identity into an idol. In the Bible, Israel had a very unique, covenant-based role tied directly to God's plan of salvation.
A role that isn't repeatable.
It isn't,
Right.
because the New Testament reorients our primary identity around the church, which is an international, multi-ethnic community of believers, not a nation-state.
So if you try to superimpose Israel's unique Old Testament role onto a modern country like the U.S.,
You're giving the nation a divine status it simply does not have. You're conflating the mission of the universal church with the, well, often very messy political goals of a single country.
the stakes become incredibly high then. And if America isn't the new Israel, then the whole basis for calling it a Christian nation has to shift.
It has to. Which leads to his next big point, this one about history. Is the U.S. founded on a specific culture, or is it founded on a set of universal principles, a creed?
And he lands firmly on the side of the creedal vision.
Absolutely. He argues the American experiment is grounded not in, say, ethnic purity or a specific religious heritage, but in universal ideas.
Things like equality before the law, individual rights.
Popular sovereignty, all the things articulated in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. These are ideals anyone from any background can affirm.
But the nationalist vision sees that as insufficient, right? It's not enough.
It's not. The book traces how Christian nationalists consistently frame the nation's identity in these narrow, explicitly Anglo Protestant cultural terms. It's backward-looking.
It prioritizes a specific version of the past.
Yes, and Miller argues that's inherently exclusionary. It privileges one group's history over the universal ideals in the founding documents.
And this is where it all comes to a head. He establishes that Christian nationalism is an ideology seeking to align public life and law with one specific Christian cultural framework.
Which, he says, makes it fundamentally incompatible with liberal democracy. It's that move from seeking influence, which is fine, to demanding institutional enforcement.
The diagnosis gets pretty pointed when he looks at the contemporary Christian right.
It does. He sees two different strands getting mixed up. On one hand, you have what he calls Christian republicanism, which he supports.
Yeah.
It affirms limited government, civic virtue, constitutional ideals.
But on the other hand,
You have Christian nationalism, which seeks cultural dominance and religious privilege, and his argument is that the second strand is becoming dominant.
and he outlines some very specific illiberal tendencies that come from that. We should list them. Number one is advocating for a strong legal or institutional Christian nation status.
Right. And number two is presenting a selective and sometimes mythical version of American history.
One that conveniently skips over or minimizes national sins like slavery.
Exactly. All to maintain this narrative of unbroken, God-sanctioned greatness, which then justifies present-day political actions.
Number three connects right to that, the mishandling of race and racism.
Yes. Often downplaying systemic injustice by arguing the real threat today is secularism, which just overshadows any real talk about race.
And number four, its connection to a kind of Jacksonian populism.
A style of politics that's historically tied to racial exclusion and a deep suspicion of outsiders. It taps into this powerful sense of cultural grievance.
It's a very detailed diagnosis, and if these intellectually demanding discussions resonate with you, remember that Mindful Moments has our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques inspiring reflection and rational thought.
It's especially valuable for aspiring authors who are looking to analyze complex narrative structures and arguments. But to get back to it, Miller's diagnosis is severe, but his goal isn't just to tear things down.
No, he wants to be constructive. He wants to offer an alternative vision.
He does. He moves us toward a different way for Christians to love their country responsibly.
And he calls this an open or creedal version of American exceptionalism.
A crucial pivot. It shifts the definition of American greatness away from ethnic or religious heritage.
And instead defines its distinctiveness through what?
Through its adherence to universal ideals, rule of law, civic virtue. American exceptionalism, in this view, isn't measured by who we were, but by how well we live up to the ideals in our own founding documents.
It's about accountability, not entitlement.
Exactly. And to make his case, he points to these powerful figures from American history.
People like Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr.
Right. They didn't say, let's throw out the Constitution. They used those very documents, those creedal principles, to hold the country accountable for its moral failures, like slavery and segregation.
Take Frederick Douglass. He wasn't demanding a new set of values.
No, he was demanding that the nation finally live up to the Declaration's promise that all men are created equal. That's the essence of it. critiquing national sins in the name of the nation's highest ideals.
So the application, the big takeaway for his audience is that Christians should acknowledge national sins.
Acknowledge them and participate in democracy by holding the country accountable to its own principles.
Instead of just baptizing a particular political party or culture as divinely mandated.
It's an affirmation of country without the idolatry, moving from loyalty to a culture to fidelity to ideals, justice, liberty, and the rule of law for everyone.
It really feels like the whole book synthesizes around that central danger, the risk of turning your country into an object of religious devotion.
That's the idolatry. And Miller's final point is that this distorts everything. It distorts the Christian witness, which ought to be universal, and it distorts political life, which ought to be liberal and democratic.
It's a powerful argument.
It leaves you with a really provocative thought. If American greatness is truly defined by its adherence to those universal ideals, equality, justice, the rule of law, and not by its cultural history or ethnic heritage, how does that change the way we approach our political disagreements today?
A lot to think about there. We've only scratched the surface of Paul D. Miller's work. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. Subscribe, share this deep dive with others, purchase the book via the provided link, and most importantly, think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.